On the 8th day of May in the year 2025, a quiet tension gave way to joyful eruption as white smoke rose above the ancient skyline of Vatican City. The plume drifted from the chimney atop the Sistine Chapel, signaling to the world that a decision had been made, one that would echo across continents and within hearts. A new chapter had begun for the Catholic Church. The cardinals of the Sacred College had chosen the 267th successor to St. Peter, placing their trust in a man whose name, until then, was known primarily in ecclesiastical circles. That man was Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, a friar shaped by both the bustling streets of Chicago and the missionary fields of Latin America. In that moment, he stepped onto the world stage as Pope Leo XIV, the first American ever to ascend to the throne of St. Peter in the 2,000-year span of church history. The election of Pope Leo XIV followed closely on the heels of a moment of mourning. The passing of Pope Francis, who died on April 21, 2025. As the Church and the world grieved, eyes turned toward Rome, where a new leader would be chosen not just to continue a legacy, but to navigate the spiritual future of more than 1 billion Catholics. But this wasn't just a story of succession, it was the unfolding of a unique personal journey. One marked by intellectual brilliance, deep humility, cultural fluency, and unwavering service. In the man now known as Leo XIV, many saw a bridge, a living link between North and South, tradition and renewal, academia and grassroots ministry. To understand the significance of this papacy, one must look back to where it all began. Robert Francis Prevost was born on the 14th of September, 1955, in the heart of Chicago, Illinois, a city woven with Catholic heritage and the rhythms of working-class life. As the youngest among several siblings, he was raised in a household where faith wasn't just spoken but lived. His lineage blended French and Italian roots, and that rich cultural background would become a quiet but steady influence in the years to come. His father, Louis Marius Prevost, played a central role in shaping the young Robert's spiritual identity. As a catechist in their local parish, Louis did more than teach the faith, he embodied it. Their home parish, St. Mary's in Chicago, was not just a place of worship but a second home. There, Robert served as an altar boy, immersed in the rhythms of the liturgy and surrounded by the presence of the Augustinian friars who guided the parish with wisdom and grace. These early encounters, steeped in community and contemplation, planted seeds that would bloom slowly but steadily. From a young age, Robert Francis displayed a rare blend of quiet determination and natural leadership. While many children his age were still unsure of their paths, he already sensed a pull toward something greater. His decision to enroll in an Augustinian minor seminary, where he completed his secondary education in the year 1973, reflected a maturity and focus far beyond his years. Yet even then, the road ahead was not entirely clear. He wrestled with a choice that many discerning young men face, whether to pursue the diocesan priesthood or to join a religious order. It was not a decision made lightly, and it involved long hours of prayer, counsel, and discernment. Eventually, his heart found its home in the Order of St. Augustine. What drew him in was more than just theology, it was the call to live in community, to embrace a life rooted in unity and shared purpose. The teachings of St. Augustine, especially the rich intellectual tradition and the emphasis on interior conversion, resonated deeply with him. That sense of calling was further affirmed when he began his studies at Villanova University in Pennsylvania, an institution affiliated with the Augustinians. There, he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics in the year 1977, a testament to his disciplined mind and his comfort with both faith and logic. But the journey did not stop with academics. That same year, he entered the novitiate of the Augustinian province of Our Mother of Good Counsel, located in St. Louis, Missouri. The novitiate marked a period of spiritual testing and commitment, culminating in his solemn vows in 1981. For Prevost, these weren't just ceremonial milestones, they were steps along a path of deep surrender and growing responsibility. Education remained a central theme in his formation. After completing his undergraduate degree, he turned toward theological studies at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. There, he pursued a Master of Divinity, immersing himself in scripture, church history, moral theology, and pastoral care. His intellectual gifts did not go unnoticed. Recognizing his potential, his superiors sent him to Rome for advanced studies in canon law at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, also known as the Angelicum. It was at the Angelicum that he completed both his licentiate and doctoral degrees. His doctoral thesis focused on the role of the local prior in the Augustinian order and exploration that reflected his growing interest in the spiritual and administrative life of his community. The research was not abstract. It was born of lived experience and a genuine desire to understand how leadership could better serve both individuals and the whole. On the 19th of June, 1982, at just 27 years old, Robert Francis Prevost was ordained to the priesthood. The ordination took place in Rome and was presided over by Archbishop Jean Jadot, who at that time served as the pro-president of the Vatican Secretariat for Non-Christians, a body that would later evolve into the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. That moment marked the formal beginning of a ministry that would eventually span decades, continents, and countless acts of quiet faithfulness. From those early years, the seeds were planted for a vocation that would not only grow, but flourish, one that would eventually lead a humble friar from Chicago to the heart of global Catholicism. Those early years in Rome were not merely academic for Robert Francis Prevost, they were foundational. The Eternal City, with its layers of history, global diversity, and constant movement of church affairs, opened his eyes to the universality of the Catholic faith. Walking the cobbled streets near the Vatican, praying at the tombs of saints, engaging with seminarians and scholars from every continent, these experiences quietly shaped his vision. They gave him more than just theological depth. They gave him a sense of mission. That sense of mission found real, lived expression far from Rome in the arid, sun-scorched northern region of Peru. In the year 1985, still young in his priesthood, Prevost was assigned to the Augustinian mission in Chulucanas, a remote area nestled within the Piura Desert. There, amid crumbling infrastructure, blistering heat, and the quiet endurance of forgotten villages, his vocation would be tested and transformed. He did not arrive as a foreign observer. He came to serve. His ministry in Peru unfolded in phases, but the timeline is remarkable. Between the years 1985 to 1986 and again from 1988 through 1998, Prevost immersed himself fully in the life of the church in Peru. He wore many hats: parish priest, diocesan official, seminary professor, and administrative leader. His presence was not symbolic, it was hands-on. He celebrated sacraments in humble chapels with dirt floors. He taught theology to seminarians preparing to serve communities struggling with both spiritual and economic poverty. And he really listened to the stories, sufferings, and faith of the people. Living alongside the poor and indigenous communities of northern Peru didn't simply influence his pastoral priorities, it defined them. He saw firsthand how the church could be a refuge, a voice, and a source of dignity in the midst of suffering. These experiences would later align him with the vision so strongly articulated by Pope Francis: a church that walks with the poor, that rejects comfort for the sake of solidarity, that places the forgotten at the very center of its mission. In recognition of his deep roots in the country, Prevost eventually became a naturalized citizen of Peru. It was not a political gesture, it was personal. Peru was no longer a place he had served. It had become a part of him. His fluency in Spanish and his cultural understanding of Latin America would later serve him well, especially as the global church continued to shift its demographic center toward the southern hemisphere. In Prevost, many saw a bridge between the developed and developing worlds, a man equally at home in Chicago and Chulucanas, in Rome and Lima. And yet, his time in Peru was not without difficulty. One of the most defining and sensitive chapters of his ministry in Peru came when he took on the critical role of confronting clergy abuse. At a time when much of the Catholic world was still grappling with how to respond, Prevost became a leading figure in pushing for accountability and healing. He was appointed as the very first president of the Episcopal Commission for the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Adults in Peru. His work involved more than policy. He sat down with survivors. He listened to their pain. He organized gatherings that gave voice to the wounded, some of whom were victims of abuse linked to the scandal surrounding the Sodalitium Christiani Vitae, a group under increasing scrutiny at the time. Prevost's approach was pastoral, deliberate, and at times controversial. There were critics who questioned the pace of reform. There were moments of backlash. But there were also victims who later spoke of the comfort they received from his quiet presence, his refusal to ignore their stories, and his determination to see justice pursued, even when it was painful. Years later, in the lead-up to his election as Pope, new headlines emerged. In the year 2025, shortly before the conclave, media outlets began reporting that the Diocese of Chiclayo, where Prevost had served as bishop, had allegedly paid $150,000 in settlements connected to claims by 3 young girls against a priest accused of abuse. The narrative quickly spread, with some framing it as a scandal and others as a smear campaign. Supporters of Prevost were quick to respond, emphasizing not only his innocence, but his long-standing commitment to transparency and accountability. They pointed to his history in Peru, his proactive stance on abuse, his willingness to meet survivors, his record of policy development as evidence that he had nothing to hide. For them, these accusations represented a painful but familiar pattern. That sometimes, those who speak out early and push for change become targets themselves. Following this turbulent period, Prevost's path returned him to the United States, where new responsibilities awaited. In the year 1999, he was named provincial of the Augustinian province of St. Thomas of Villanova, headquartered in the Chicago region. In this leadership role, he oversaw the spiritual and administrative health of the order's communities throughout the region. His balanced leadership style, shaped by his years in Latin America, began to attract attention from beyond American borders. By the year 2001, that attention culminated in a major development. Robert Francis Prevost was elected Prior General of the entire Order of St. Augustine. It was a rare honor and a heavy responsibility. As Prior General, he was tasked with overseeing Augustinian communities across the globe, from African missions and Asian schools to European monasteries and Latin American parishes. He was re-elected for a second term, serving until the year 2013. Over those 12 years, he traveled constantly, listening, mediating, teaching, and uniting. Those global travels were not ceremonial. They were pastoral pilgrimages. He visited friars in remote regions of Africa, walked among communities in the Philippines, and participated in theological dialogues across Europe and Latin America. His ability to navigate diverse ecclesial cultures with both respect and clarity earned him a reputation as a rare figure, one who could unite without erasing difference, one who could lead without domination. However, leadership often brings scrutiny. During his time as provincial in the United States, Prevost faced criticism regarding his response to a sexual abuse case involving Richard McGrath, a priest of the order who would later be convicted for crimes involving minors. Critics argued that the process lacked transparency. Defenders, however, emphasized the evolving protocols of the time and pointed to Prevost's later track record of prioritizing victim care and ethical standards in the face of deeply entrenched institutional failings. As these complex realities converged, his missionary heart, his global leadership, and his willingness to confront painful truths, one thing became clear. Robert Francis Prevost was not a man who avoided challenges. He walked into them, sometimes quietly, sometimes with resistance, but always with the aim of reconciliation and renewal. During one of the most difficult moments of his early leadership, a controversy resurfaced that tested Robert Francis Prevost's growing reputation. The case involved a priest who had been accused of misconduct, but was allowed to remain within a priory located near a school, even after concerns had been raised. Though the priest was eventually removed from ministry and formally laicized in the year 2012, the timeline raised questions. Critics, including the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, known by the acronym SNAP, argued that allowing the priest to stay in proximity to children for so long reflected a lack of urgency. Defenders of Prevost pushed back, noting that he had operated within the canonical and procedural boundaries of the time. They emphasized that many protocols regarding clergy abuse were still evolving during that period, and that hindsight should not be used to obscure the realities faced by church leaders navigating uncharted territory. Still, for some, the incident left a blemish. For others, it was a reflection of the wider systemic struggle, the church faced in responding to abuse with transparency and justice. Despite these shadows, Prevost's steady ascent within the church continued. His global understanding, missionary background, and administrative strength led to his appointment in the year 2014 as the apostolic administrator of the Diocese of Chiclayo, located in northern Peru. A year later, in 2015, he was consecrated as the bishop of that diocese. His pastoral jurisdiction included a diverse spectrum of communities from bustling urban centers to impoverished shantytowns and vast rural landscapes. As bishop, his pastoral style prioritized consultation, inclusion, and the active participation of laypeople in the life of the church. This approach echoed the vision promoted by Pope Francis, a church that listens, that walks together, and that resists clericalism in favor of shared responsibility. His deep concern for education and cultural renewal came to the forefront in the year 2019, when he was elected president of the Commission for Education and Culture within the Peruvian Bishops' Conference. Around the same time, he also served in a leadership capacity within Caritas Peru, reinforcing his long-standing commitment to social justice and human dignity. These appointments signaled more than local influence, they marked a growing trust from Rome. That same year, he was appointed a member of the Vatican's Congregation for the Clergy. The following year, in 2020, he joined the Congregation for Bishops, a body instrumental in selecting new bishops across the globe. These two roles placed him at the very center of how the Church would shape its future leadership by choosing those who would shepherd the faithful for decades to come. Then came a major turning point. In January of the year 2023, Pope Francis appointed Robert Francis Prevost as the prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops, one of the most influential and strategic posts within the Roman Curia. This position gave him direct oversight of the global process for appointing bishops, a responsibility that required spiritual discernment, pastoral insight, and political sensitivity. Alongside this role, he was also named the president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, placing him in a unique position to guide the Church's trajectory in a region home to some of the most vibrant Catholic communities in the world. His tenure as prefect was marked by a noticeable shift in the kind of leaders the Church began to elevate. Gone were the days of emphasizing only doctrinal orthodoxy or hierarchical prestige. Under Prevost's guidance, bishop candidates were evaluated for their ability to listen, serve, and remain close to the poor. The Church, he believed, needed shepherds more than administrators, men who could walk with their people rather than rule from above. Those who worked closely with Prevost often described him as thoughtful, methodical, and attentive. A French bishop once remarked that Prevost possessed a rare ability to ask the right questions at the right time, and had a gift for synthesizing complex issues without rushing to judgment. In September of 2023, his service was formally recognized when he was created Cardinal Deacon of Santa Monica of the Augustinians. Just over a year later, in February of 2025, he was promoted to the rank of Cardinal Bishop, assigned to the Suburbicarian Diocese of Albano, a title that underscored the high regard in which he was held by Pope Francis. Still, his prominent role at the Dicastery for Bishops came under scrutiny. Certain cardinals and advocates for abuse survivors questioned whether his past record on handling abuse cases was sufficient for someone being quietly considered as a potential future pope. Some believed that the Church, in such a critical moment of transition, needed a figure whose reputation was entirely without controversy. Others, however, viewed these concerns as calculated efforts to diminish a candidate closely aligned with the reform-minded agenda of Pope Francis. Then came the moment that would define his life. Following the death of Pope Francis in April of the year 2025, the Catholic world turned its gaze once again toward the Sistine Chapel. 133 cardinals under the age of 80 gathered in solemn prayer and deliberation to choose a new pontiff. The eyes of the faithful and of the world watched as the College of Cardinals embarked on the sacred duty of electing the next successor to St. Peter. Robert Francis Prevost quickly emerged as one of the most discussed and serious candidates, what insiders call a papabile. His supporters described him as the ideal blend, an American by birth, but deeply international in formation, a missionary at heart, but thoroughly experienced in church governance, a bridge between progressives and conservatives, capable of uniting rather than dividing. While other contenders vied for attention, Prevost's calm presence and reputation for integrity gained quiet momentum. One of his key rivals was Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, whose influence was widely acknowledged. However, Parolin's homily during the pre-conclave Mass was received with lukewarm responses. Critics pointed to a lack of emotional resonance and questioned whether he could inspire the kind of hope the Church urgently needed. In contrast, Prevost's record of global service and quiet reform struck a chord with many of the voting cardinals. Supporters of Prevost included prominent figures like Cardinal Oscar Andrés Rodríguez Maradiaga, who praised his administrative insight, clear moral vision, and deep connection to the Church's most vulnerable members. What had once been seen as a geopolitical liability, his American citizenship, no longer carried the same weight. In a conclave where less than half of the voting members were European, and where more than 80% had been appointed by Pope Francis, the criteria had shifted. Geography mattered less, spirituality mattered more. Prevost's nearly 2 decades in Peru, along with his Peruvian citizenship, helped soften any resistance to his American roots. He wasn't seen as a product of power politics, he was viewed as a global pastor, one whose feet had touched the dusty roads of the poor, and whose mind had navigated the corridors of the Vatican. Then, on the 8th day of May, 2025, after a number of ballots whose details remain undisclosed, the white smoke once again rose. The crowd below St. Peter's Basilica erupted. Robert Francis Prevost had been chosen to lead the Catholic Church as its 267th pope. He took the name Leo XIV in honor of Pope Leo XIII, who served from the year 1878 to 1903, a pontiff known for his intellect, his diplomacy, and his foundational encyclical Rerum Novarum, which spoke to the dignity of workers and the need for social justice. In that single choice, Pope Leo XIV signaled both continuity and change. A legacy reborn. A new chapter opened. The choice of the name Leo XIV was not merely a tribute to one pontiff, it echoed the legacies of several. While many immediately connected the name to Pope Leo XIII, whose intellect and commitment to Catholic social teaching left an indelible mark on the modern Church, others saw deeper layers in the name. Historians and theologians alike noted the resonance with Pope Leo X, a Renaissance-era pope remembered for his role in the cultural flourishing of the Vatican and his association with humanist scholarship. Although his pontificate was complex, the connection signaled a reverence for learning, art, and dialogue. Still others recalled Pope Leo XI, whose reign lasted barely a month, but whose brief time as pope was defined by a sincere desire to enact reform and restore credibility to the papacy. By adopting this name, Pope Leo XIV situated himself within a lineage that honored wisdom, culture, reform, and courage in the face of spiritual and institutional challenge. And indeed, challenge now defines the horizon. As Pope Leo XIV steps into this role, he inherits a church standing at a precarious crossroads. In the global West, many parishes echo with emptier pews. The steady rise of secularism has made faith less visible in public life. Young people increasingly identify with no religion at all, and cultural norms in countries like the United States, Canada, and much of Europe have drifted far from traditional Catholic teachings. Meanwhile, internal divisions within the Church continue to deepen. Questions surrounding the ordination of women, the possibility of blessing same-sex couples, and the role of the traditional Latin Mass have sparked fierce debates among theologians, bishops, and laypeople alike. These are not issues that can be resolved overnight. Nor are they simply matters of doctrine, they are deeply entwined with questions of identity, justice, inclusion, and the Church's mission in a rapidly changing world. Into this complex landscape steps a man shaped by Augustinian spirituality, a tradition that emphasizes community, interior transformation, and unity amidst difference. For Pope Leo XIV, this spiritual foundation may prove to be his most powerful tool. His commitment to synodality, the practice of listening, walking together, and discerning in community positions him to address sensitive topics with both care and clarity. There is little doubt that Leo XIV will continue many of the priorities established under Pope Francis. His closeness to the late Pope, both personally and theologically, is well known. Both men share a vision of the church that is outward-facing, committed to the poor, and rooted in the gospel's call to justice and mercy. Environmental stewardship, a hallmark of Francis's pontificate, is likely to remain central. Leo XIV has already demonstrated a deep awareness of ecological concerns, particularly how environmental degradation disproportionately harms the world's poorest communities. His missionary background is not just a footnote, it is a defining feature of his identity. Having lived and served in the deserts of northern Peru, Leo XIV understands the Church not as a distant institution, but as a living presence among the forgotten. He is fluent in English, Spanish, and Italian, which allows him to communicate directly with a wide swath of the Catholic world. This linguistic and cultural fluency will be vital, especially as the demographic center of global Catholicism continues shifting toward the South Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, where the faith is vibrant and rapidly expanding. Yet, for all his strengths, Pope Leo XIV faces a series of unavoidable tensions. Some observers have noted that, while he shares the pastoral vision of Francis, he has remained relatively silent on the most divisive moral topics of the age. His public statements on issues such as homosexuality, gender identity, and broader questions of human sexuality have been few and measured. This has led both critics and supporters to speculate on how he will engage with these matters moving forward. Some expect a continuation of careful ambiguity, choosing to emphasize mercy over condemnation. Others hope he will bring greater clarity, offering theological guidance that is both compassionate and grounded. One issue that will undoubtedly follow him into his papacy is the ongoing crisis of clergy sexual abuse. Although significant reforms have been implemented in recent decades, the scars remain. Trust must still be rebuilt. Pope Leo XIV brings to this issue not only administrative experience but personal proximity. His work in Peru, particularly in the areas of safeguarding and survivor advocacy, gives him credibility. And yet, because of his past leadership roles, some controversies from earlier periods may resurface. Supporters are quick to point to his track record: a man who met with victims, helped establish structures for protection, and prioritized listening over institutional defensiveness. They see in him a leader who will not run from the pain of the past, but use it as a guide for future action. Still, his critics are watching closely. They want to see whether his papacy will usher in deeper, more systemic change or simply continue the gradual reforms of the past 2 decades. The credibility of the Church in many parts of the world rests on this single issue. But beneath the policies, decisions, and expectations lies the person Pope Leo XIV himself. Despite the weight of his new office, those who have worked closely with him describe a man remarkably unburdened by power. Known for his humility and unpretentious manner, he is more likely to listen quietly in a room than to dominate the conversation. In his interactions with others, there is a simplicity that disarms formality. His pastoral warmth, shaped by decades among the poor and the marginalized, is evident in the smallest gestures: a lingering handshake, a gentle word, a moment of silent presence. He is not a showman. He is not a politician. But he is a shepherd, quiet, steady, and aware that the work ahead is as much about healing as it is about leading. As the world watches this new chapter unfold, the questions remain open. Will Leo XIV steer the Church through its divisions with the wisdom of the saints who came before him? Will his global experience help him unify a fractured flock? Will his silence on certain issues become a strength of listening or a weakness of indecision? The answers will not come in days or months. They will come slowly, shaped by time, prayer, and the unfolding of history. But for now, one thing is certain. Pope Leo XIV enters the papacy not as a man seeking greatness, but as one ready to carry the burden of faith with courage, with humility, and with hope. Behind the titles, behind the ceremonies, and behind the robes is a man with very human interests, quirks, joys, and habits that remind us that even a pope walks in ordinary shoes. Though now enveloped by the solemnity of the papacy, Pope Leo XIV has long held a quiet fondness for simple pleasures. Among them, a love for tennis. During his years of service in Rome, he once expressed with a hint of nostalgia that he rarely had time to play anymore. Tennis was never just a pastime for him, it was a way to stay grounded, a place where he could breathe outside the walls of administration and responsibility. It revealed something important, that even amid his theological depth and global duties, he never lost touch with his humanity. His connection to Peru runs deeper than geography. Having spent nearly 2 decades immersed in its language, customs, and rhythms, he absorbed far more than ministry experience. The culture became part of him. The vibrant music, the warmth of its people, the rich flavors of Peruvian cuisine, these were not distant curiosities to him, but daily companions. He would often savor traditional dishes like lomo saltado or ají de gallina, not simply as meals, but as expressions of love and heritage. In music, he found joy in the earthy pulse of marinera and hueno, rhythms that spoke of both resilience and celebration. These cultural affinities, far from being mere anecdotes, reflect something essential about the man. His ability to enter into the life of others not as a visitor, but as a brother. Those who have worked closely with him, fellow priests, bishops, and lay leaders, consistently highlight one particular strength: his ability to listen. Not just to hear, but to truly take in what is said, to reflect, and to respond with care. In a church that spans every continent and touches every human experience, this skill is more than valuable, it is vital. Leadership, especially at the level of the universal church, cannot be reduced to decrees and statements. It requires presence, it requires empathy, and it requires consensus building rooted not in compromise, but in communion. Leo XIV's leadership style is not one of domination or display. It is subtle, collaborative, and deeply shaped by his Augustinian heritage. At the core of his spirituality lies the ancient wisdom of Saint Augustine, who once wrote that unity is not uniformity, but harmony in diversity. That spirit is captured in the personal motto that Pope Leo XIV has chosen for his papacy. In the one Christ, we are one. These words are more than symbolic, they are a mission statement. In a time marked by fragmentation, both within the church and the world, his vision is one of reconciliation and shared belonging. He calls for a church where different voices are not silenced, but brought together in dialogue under the guidance of Christ. And then came that moment, the moment that centuries of tradition have preserved, and that the faithful await with breath held still. Standing on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, high above the square where the church's heartbeat echoes through marble and stone, Pope Leo XIV stepped into the light. The vast crowd below, some weeping, others cheering, stood in unified anticipation. Cameras from around the globe zoomed in. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Pilgrims clutched rosaries. The bells of St. Peter's rang out once more, not for mourning, but for new beginnings. In that moment, he carried more than the weight of papal garments. He bore the hopes, prayers, and expectations of over 1,400,000,000 Catholics around the world. Each person watching from afar, whether in a small chapel in rural Uganda, a bustling cathedral in Brazil, or a living room in South Korea, was witnessing the start of a new chapter in the Church's long and storied journey. He is the first American ever to hold the keys of St. Peter. A fact that, once controversial, now feels strangely fitting. For in him, there is Chicago grit, the kind that comes from growing up in a working-class neighborhood, shaped by faith and family. There is Peruvian heart, the deep compassion born from years among the forgotten, the poor, and the searching. And there is Roman wisdom, the kind earned not by privilege, but through decades of careful stewardship, prayer, and pastoral service within the sacred walls of the Vatican. Pope Leo XIV does not walk into this new role as a man seeking acclaim. He steps forward as a servant of God, a servant of the Church, a servant of every soul who longs for meaning, mercy, and hope. The questions of what his papacy will become cannot be answered in a single day, nor should they be. What matters now is not speculation, but presence. The world does not look to him for perfection. It looks to him for faithfulness. And so the bells ring, the square brightens, and the wind stirs the papal banner once more. A new page is being written not just in Vatican annals, but in the hearts of the faithful. As the sun set behind the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in the days that followed his election, something remarkable began to unfold, not in grand pronouncements or sweeping reforms, but in the small gestures, subtle choices, and quiet rhythms of a man newly clothed in white. For Pope Leo XIV, the start of his papacy was not marked by spectacle. It was marked by presence. Where others might have entered with bold declarations, he arrived with silence, listening first to the heartbeat of the Church before adding his own voice to its centuries-old symphony. One of the earliest signs of his direction came not from a press release or encyclical, but from a decision about residence. Rather than immediately moving into the more formal apostolic palace, Pope Leo XIV initially chose to remain in the Domus Sancti Marthi, the modest Vatican guest house where he had stayed during the conclave. While this choice may seem logistical, it was deeply symbolic. Much like Pope Francis before him, he appeared to resist the trappings of elevated status in favor of simplicity, community, and accessibility. Visitors and Vatican staff quickly noticed. Here was a pope who stood in the breakfast line with others, nodded in passing with quiet warmth, and offered his time generously. He began meeting with individuals behind closed doors, victims of abuse, displaced migrants, elderly priests who had given decades to the Church with little recognition. There were no photographers present. No Vatican press bulletins followed. But the stories began to surface. Whispers became echoes. And soon, the world began to realize that Pope Leo XIV was not simply continuing the pastoral style of his predecessor, he was deepening it in his own way. His first homily as Pope, delivered during the Mass of Inauguration in St. Peter's Square, revealed even more. The crowds were vast, stretching from the steps of the Basilica down the Via della Conciliazione, where flags waved and candles flickered. His voice, calm but unwavering, spoke not of triumph or policy but of wounds. The Church, he said, must be a field hospital before it can be a throne. We are not here to rule the world, but to wash its feet. Those words landed heavily. They were not meant for headlines. They were meant for hearts. And for many Catholics, they were exactly what they needed to hear. The homily continued, drawing on the words of St. Augustine, whose writings had long shaped Leo's theological imagination. Unity, he said, does not come from agreement, but from love. And where love is lacking, no law, no doctrine, no structure can hold us together. With that, he established a theme that would guide the early months of his papacy, a theme of listening, reconciliation, and communion without compromise. Internally, one of his earliest actions involved requesting a comprehensive report from the Vatican's dicastery for bishops, the very office he once led. He wanted to understand the status of episcopal appointments, particularly in regions facing pastoral crises or where leadership had gone unfilled for too long. His message to the Curia was clear. Local churches must not be left waiting. The shepherds must be sent, and they must be ready to walk with the people, not above them. Soon after, he met with a group of young Catholics from sub-Saharan Africa, many of whom were studying theology or engaged in youth ministry. The meeting had been planned prior to his election, but Leo insisted it remain on his calendar. During their encounter, he chose to set aside prepared remarks and instead engaged them in an open dialogue. He asked them what challenges they faced, what joys they found in their faith, and how the Church could better support them. One young woman, moved by his humility, later shared that he listened to us like a father, not a pope. His first trip outside the Vatican was not to a cathedral or political summit, but to a small hospice in the outskirts of Rome. There, surrounded by terminally ill patients and their families, he moved from bed to bed, offering blessings, holding hands, and in one case, quietly singing a hymn in Spanish with a dying woman from Colombia. The images of that visit, discreetly captured by a nurse and later shared online, went viral within hours. Not because they were curated, but because they were real. His approach to communication also reflected this pastoral tone. The first official papal document of his reign was not a doctrinal encyclical, but a pastoral letter addressed to the people at the edges, a handwritten note later transcribed and translated into multiple languages. In it, he acknowledged those who feel alienated from the Church, the divorced, the undocumented, the disillusioned, the doubting. "You are not outside," he wrote. "You are missed. Come home, not to judgment, but to love." This letter sparked wide discussion across dioceses worldwide. In some circles, it was hailed as revolutionary, in others, cautiously received. but few could deny the emotional weight it carried. Here was a pope speaking not from a pulpit, but from eye level, reaching out, not reaching down. Meanwhile, within Vatican walls, reform discussions resumed, but with a different tone. Pope Leo XIV convened small, diverse working groups of bishops, religious, theologians, and laypeople to advise on matters such as synodality, ecological sustainability, and clerical formation. These groups were not ceremonial. He attended many of the sessions himself, sometimes entering without an entourage, sitting in the back, taking notes. One cardinal, after participating in a session on liturgical inclusivity, remarked, "He does not command, he cultivates." The international press speculated on whether these early actions would lead to dramatic shifts. Would he change policies on liturgy? Would he take a bold stance on moral teachings? Would he alter the structures of Vatican governance? But Leo XIV remained measured. His first months revealed a pattern. Act slowly, but listen deeply. Speak softly, but with clarity. Reform not for reform's sake, but for the sake of communion. And yet, even as he pursued a style of calm leadership, the weight of expectation grew. From conservative voices urging doctrinal firmness to progressive communities demanding immediate change, the pressures came from every side. But in each response, Leo XIV offered the same steady message. The Church must walk together not as factions, but as one pilgrim people. In an interview given by one of his longtime colleagues, a fellow Augustinian friar, the essence of Pope Leo XIV was captured in a few words. He is not here to be popular. He is here to be faithful. And in faithfulness, he hopes we will find unity again. As the months unfolded and the seasons changed in St. Peter's Square, the papacy of Leo XIV took root not with thunder, but with rain. Quiet, constant, and nurturing. As the first year of Pope Leo XIV's pontificate drew to a close, it became clear that his leadership was not going to be measured by headlines or grand gestures, but by something deeper, quieter, and far more enduring. His was a papacy that flowed not from dominance, but from devotion, not from command, but from compassion. In a world often shaped by spectacle, he chose sincerity. And in a church stretched across continents and burdened by both history and hope, he chose to serve not as a ruler, but as a shepherd. What emerged was not a man trying to reshape the church in his image, but one deeply committed to helping the church remember its own. He reminded the faithful, through homilies and handwritten letters, through silent visits and gentle words, that holiness is not distant, it is near. Found in the hidden corners of the world, among the forgotten, the broken, and the small. That was where he spent his energy. That was where he chose to walk. From the streets of Chicago to the villages of Peru, from the shadowed halls of Rome to the balcony of St. Peter's, Leo XIV carried with him the memories of people, not positions. His papacy became less about what he would change, and more about how he would love. And in doing so, he began to mend a church wounded by division, scandal, and fatigue, not with programs or proclamations, but with presence. There were still questions. There always will be. There were debates within the Curia, passionate disagreements among theologians, pressures from all sides. But beneath it all, a quiet confidence had started to grow. A feeling that, perhaps, the church had been entrusted to a man who understood its deepest need, to be healed. In his own words, spoken one evening after a liturgy attended by children with disabilities, he offered a reflection that captured the soul of his mission. The world doesn't need another leader. It needs a witness. And the church must be that witness. Not by towering above the world, but by kneeling beside it. That is the legacy Pope Leo XIV began to build, not one chiseled in marble, but one etched in the hearts of those who saw him, heard him, and felt, even if just for a moment, the nearness of Christ through him. Whether his reign lasts many years or only a few, one truth has already become undeniable. Something sacred has begun. And for the 1,400,000,000 souls who look to the dome of St. Peter's as a beacon, there is once again a reason to hope.